Hi everyone. Today we're going to look at move 3 within the methods section, and this move is called analyzing the data. Move 3 is third in the series of moves in the methods section. We've already talked about move 1, contextualizing the study methods, and move 2, describing the study. Here in move 3, we're going to explore the different functions of this move, primarily to provide information about the data analysis that is conducted within the study. Move 3 can also contain information about how the data were prepared for analysis, as well as statements about your credibility pertaining to that analysis. Okay, so let's look at the steps within move 3. There are 3 steps that are within move 3. They are preparing the data, describing the data analysis, and establishing credibility. Just like with the other moves and the other sections of the paper that we've discussed, these steps may or may not be included depending on the structure of your particular study as well as your field. And these steps, just like the moves as we've discussed in the past, may not necessarily appear in this order. So you should expect to be able to see these moves or these steps appearing in different places depending on how a particular paper is structured. So now we're going to talk about each of the steps in greater detail. The first step we're going to talk about is preparing the data, and the function of this step is to show what was done to the data and also how the data were prepared for analysis. So in other words, the step is used to explain data selection, things like sampling, screening, cleaning, or inclusion or exclusion of particular types of data, correction of data. So all sorts of things that you could do to alter your data in some way and select which data is included. And also data preparation, which would include things that are more like manipulating your data, things like transforming the data, maybe from qualitative to quantitative data, coding the data in some manner, tabulating, estimating. All of these different types of things would often occur in within this step of preparing the data. These are important things to be able to explain to your audience because these are things that can affect the actual outcome of your study. So making sure to include this step is very crucial. Here are a few examples. In the first sentence from economics, we see the author saying, we exclude the third wave of the data from the analysis. And here we can see that they're limiting the data, right? They're not including all of the data, so they're selecting certain data to exclude from their analysis. And this would be important if we were going to replicate their study or had other questions about their conclusions. In our second sentence, we have 2- and 3-way interactions among main effects were also included in the model. So we have actually an example of things that were included, right? So they're saying that there's things that were specifically included within their data. And within the data analysis. Okay, let's look at the second step. And the second step, describing the data analysis, provides, as it says, a description of the actual analysis with or without certain tools. This step functions to describe how your data analysis was done, as well as to indicate what procedures were done and were used within your analysis. Things like statistical techniques, coding schemes, other sorts of tools that you use for your data analysis. And these can be quantitative or qualitative tools and can range really broadly. So let's look at a few examples here. In our first sentence, we have the data were processed with a big long acronym and analyzed using Sparky and a reference for that. So we've got information about how the data were processed and analyzed, giving us more information about describing the data analysis in this biophysics paper. And in the second example, it says Pearson correlations were used to determine correlations. Again, we have an example of the type of statistical technique that was used to get the results. Notice again that the results themselves are not being discussed here. So we have information about how the data were prepared, about how the data were analyzed, but we're not discussing the actual results of that analysis yet. Okay, our third step is called establishing credibility. And the function of this step is to assert and establish the credibility of the analysis and the data processing. So we use this step to present a rationale for the choice of our data analysis processes. So we may need to justify why we've chosen certain processes over others. We might use this step to indicate the different procedures that were used that will help provide some sort of credibility in our actual analysis. So reliability calculations, other sorts of validity techniques. And we may also give recognition to existing or pre-existing limitations. So things that you may need to clarify right before you even get into the actual results of your study. All of this is done to help kind of bolster your claims of credibility, reliability, validity, depending on the framework you're working within, so that the readers have more confidence in what you're doing, that you've already examined potential pitfalls and problems, and you're recognizing them ahead of time. So we have example here. In our first example, it says, it should be noted that since the circular Tygon tubing of the standard paradigm quickset infusion set is only semi-transparent, is very difficult, if not impossible, to conduct quantitative micropiv measurements. And so they're laying out a limitation. Something is difficult to do, and this is a pre-existing condition that's going to limit the results of their study. And in our second example, it says, although the same amount of reactants were used to produce the 508 and 625 nanomillimeter particles, slight differences in stirring speed likely contributed to the size variations. So again, they're acknowledging a limitation ahead of time that's saying, you know, our data may say something, but we're not confident in that fact. And remember that these trustworthy and credibility things kind of go together to build an entire picture of your trustworthiness as an author. So pointing out limitations is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, you might trust these authors a bit more for having done that. Okay, now that we've talked about the steps, I'm going to show you some example sentences, and your task is to figure out which step is being discussed here. Go ahead and pause your video so you have a chance to look at the step and think about it. Okay, you got a chance to analyze this one? In this sentence, it says the data were also analyzed by MAS5 analysis. Probe sets with P greater than 0.01 were excluded. And here I've analyzed, or I've underlined for you some of the key terms or the parts of the sentence that helped me figure out what was going on. And this is an example of both describing the data analysis in the first part of the sentence, analyzed by the MAS5 analysis, and also an example of preparing the data. The latter part of the sentence, after the semicolon, says probe sets with P greater than 0.01 were excluded. So that part of the sentence shows that something's been limited from the data, and the first part shows that how the data was analyzed. So again, we have got two steps, two different functions within this sentence. Here's another example. Okay, let's look at this example together. In this example, we see the author saying, actually, we did not use the minimum for suburban score, but the 95th or 5th percentile score to make this indicator less sensitive to outliers. And here we have an example where they're asserting a rationale for the choices they've made. And things that function to assert that rationale are within the step of establishing credibility. So that helps the authors, again, assert their reliability for the readers of the paper. Okay, here's our next step. Okay, within this step, we've got, again, some words underlined. And I've said that statistical significance were calculated in the Kaleidograph or Excel with students' t-tests used for unpaired samples. And hopefully those words, the statistical significances were calculated and students' t-test helped point out to you that this is an example of describing the data analysis. Here the authors are saying different tests that they used to show the relationship with their data. Okay, hopefully that made sense to you. The next step is to do the reading about Move 3, and that will help review the different steps and their functions and how they work together. And then, as always, complete the corpus exploration tasks and quiz to help check your understanding of what you've learned today in lecture.